we all know that our dogs are quite adaptable. But how would global warming or a new ice age alter their looks? Come on, it's time to unleash our imaginations. And here to help us is America's pet advocate. He's a great, great veterinarian and a good friend. We're talking Dr. Ernie Ward. Welcome back to the show, Dr. Ernie.
Oh gosh, Arden, thank you so much. Your listeners are the greatest. And this is it's a really kind of an interesting topic that maybe people haven't given some thought to,
I like it. I mean, you have teamed up with Base Paws. This is a pet genetic company, and you all are trying to scientifically predict how global warming or a new ice age is going to alter the appearance of many, many dog breeds. And I think you're also hopefully going to share a little bit about what scientists speculate how dogs maybe on Mars would look like.
That's right.
You gotta admit, that's wild.
It is. But Arden, these are actually serious questions that demand serious scrutiny, right? And we're not the first to look at this. I mean, Oxford researchers have looked at this over time. And really what people are most concerned about is like, what changes would happen to like the plants that we eat? What about water and minerals? And how would we live, right? And more importantly, if thousands of years of climate change occur in the future, how would that change our own physiology? And so all we did was sort of take some of that research that's in existence out there already and some very, very, researched studies. And they say, okay, what if we just use our imagination, as you mentioned, and applied this to dogs? And I'll tell you, I do believe that a lot of this stuff is going to come to fruition. My dear friend, Stephen Kotler, who's a very famous author, he writes all these books, Abundance, and he has teamed up with a lot of futurists. And this goes back to a conversation Stephen and I were having 20 years ago, because we were worried about the coming resource scarcity, right? So what that means out there to the listeners is that food prices, water scarcity, all those things would impact our ability to have pets, right? Because that becomes kind of a luxury whenever you can barely feed and provide water for your family. So Steve and I have been running these thought experiments for 20 or more years amongst ourselves and some of our close friends. But it was really fun to put it into action and then actually generate some interesting images using AI.
Oh, yeah. And we hopefully are going to be showing those images with a link to this episode. So everybody, you're going to get a look at what a beagle might look like, or a Great Dane and things like that. So, I mean, Dr. Ernie, there's three scenarios. So let's go to global warming for 200, please. So how could our dogs adapt to global warming? And I think the fur is gone.
Yeah, right. Because heat is going to be the biggest enemy of us, right? And so obviously preserving hydration, that's going to be also paramount to survival. And, and one of the things too, we were talking to some journalists and one of the skeptics said, well, you're just assuming that these changes occur on their own. But remember, when it comes to dogs, we select the traits that make sense. So, in the future, these changes will be accelerated by human breeding and interactions, right? I mean, just like we've seen a preponderance of mixed breed dogs, all the doodles out there, if you will. Like we're doing that. The reason that doodles are popular is because they meet a current need of current urban society, right? We wanted dogs that were a little smaller, a little more trainable, and
that hairy.
Right, exactly. So I believe that all these changes will be accelerated. So we're looking at thinner coats, obviously, right? We're probably looking at some dispersal of heat, which would be like maybe larger ears, right?
Oh, really? Oh, my dog Kona has big ears. She's she's happy about that. I want big ear dogs. Yeah.
And maybe even the appendages would be either shorter or longer. And there's a couple of scenarios that could impact that, right? Because obviously it depends on really what we breed them for. My guess, I surmise that we'll build smaller dogs, if you will, because they require less energy. And that means, of course, less heat to dissipate. Also, it requires less water and it enables them to preserve it. Also, coloration, Arden, right? I mean, so we're probably going to see lighter colors to help reflect back UV rays to also keep them cool. So, these are just some fun things.
So all the little dogs in the world right now are clapping their paws because they're being branded as Purse My Ride dogs, but they may be the dogs in a global warming 10,000 year scenario.
Without a doubt. And one of the things, too, if we look at sort of how human physiology and our own morphology, our body shapes and sizes change, remember that if you look at people that live around the equator of the planet, right? So the warmest regions around the center of the earth, those people tend to be smaller in stature, okay? And this is because, again, to preserve, hydration and use less resources and all that sort of stuff. It wasn't really until humans began going into colder climates up northern latitudes that we started seeing increases in size. And there's a lot of reasons for this, including preservation of heat, right? To warm up and actually to be able to store extra food because, we might have some intervals between. So again, just all speculation, but 10,000 years into the future, I think that today's dogs will look largely the same, but there will be some significant changes. The other thing is we don't know what's happening underneath the fur, right? That's where I think the real adaptations are going to occur. I think these dogs are going to, again, improve their kidney functions to conserve water and electrolytes more efficiently. I also believe that hormonally, they're going to change probably the way their reproductive patterns are because, if we
not have as many puppies
not
or maybe
have as many, exactly. And maybe only once a year instead of multiple times a year. Right. So, for most dogs, they go through 2 heat cycles currently, and maybe that gets reduced to 1, again, just because of resource scarcity and survivability and so forth. So I think that we're going to see some of those physiological changes. One of the things we were talking about also as we were brainstorming around this is like, what adaptations can you make physiologically to protect yourself against radiation injury, right? So there might be some different cells that would become more abundant, if you will, to help protect us. And again, just what would we look at as far as like the DNA, like the telomeres, which is the end of it, which kind of is that biological time clock, that we talk about a lot. So the length of telomeres indicates lifespan. So
I think you said something, and this is fascinating. I mean, I've known you for many years, and you are my man. You started the Association for the Prevention of Pet Obesity. You did a great book called Chow Hounds. We've interviewed. You're an amazing guy. You got to say, this was kind of a cool little opportunity for you to peek into the future. Take a furry canine globe and shake it and say what's going to be happening, right?
Oh, yeah. And again, Base Paws by Zoetis, which, Zoetis is the world's largest animal health company. They're looking at these things.
Yeah, these are big players.
They're imagining, the future in 100 and 300 years, right? I mean, these are companies that are going to be around for a long time, and they have been around for a long time. And so, for us, it's just a fun way to kind of take genetics and say what kind of changes might be accelerated or adaptations might, be generated by climate change. So the first scenario, of course, is the most likely based on the current science, and that is a warming planet. But we also looked at a few other scenarios.
And before we go to the side of it, what about the eyes of dogs? If we are, in fact, going to global warming, how is that going to alter their look or their function?
Yeah, one of the things that I proposed was that we'd see more hooded lenses. So we're actually going to see probably an elongation of the actual eyelids. And more importantly, the eyes would become more sunken into the skull because, again, this abundance of UV radiation is really what's going to tell us. Also, I think probably the iris is going to adapt to become smaller because right now dogs are excellent in low light, but in the future, especially if we see longer days or less, protection in the atmosphere from UV radiation, they may want to constrict further, similar to cats, perhaps. Now that's a slightly different issue, but for us, we're looking at. I think the eyes will be also one of those things. But the biggest take home that I think we should all realize is that as our lives change, as it becomes hotter, as water becomes a prized commodity, right? As food becomes more expensive in the future. And I hope none of this happens, right? But if it does, then we're going to have to adapt our pets to coincide with that. And so that means that maybe feeding a 150-pound dog and giving them water and shelter and cooling them might be, at an economic challenge, a burden for us. So we might say, instead of 150-pound dogs, all dogs start to look more like they're 10 or 20-pound dogs.
Thanks so much for making our tails wag by watching this guest interview from Arden Moore's Four-Legged Life. Four-Legged Life. Make sure to subscribe so you're up to date with all of our Four-Legged Life content. Four-Legged Life. Four-Legged Life.